The last thing he wrote was a lie. Or perhaps a prayer. His name was Urtanu, and he was the high scribe of Ugarit. His world was ink and clay, the scent of cedarwood from the palace archives, the weight of 1,000 years of history in his hands. On this day, the air, thick with salt and the coming autumn, also carried a new smell. Smoke, acrid and too close. Outside his window, the sun beat down on the greatest port city in the world, a mosaic of ivory and bronze, where ships from Crete with their bull-headed prows bobbed next to lumbering Egyptian barges heavy with grain and gold. For centuries, this was the center of everything, the beating heart of a vibrant, interconnected world. But hearts can stop. The scratching of Urtanu's stylus was frantic. It was a letter, not a trade ledger or a royal decree, but a desperate plea from his king, Amurapi, to the ruler of Al-Ashia, the king of Cyprus. The clay was still wet, the cuneiform wedges sharp and hurried. "My father," it began, "behold, the enemy's ships came. My cities were burned, and they did evil things in my country. Does not my father know that all my troops and chariots are in the land of Hatti, and all my ships are in the land of Lucca? The country is abandoned to itself. May my father know it. The 7 ships of the enemy that came here have inflicted much damage upon us." He pressed the stylus down, his knuckles white. 7 ships. It was a lie, a desperate, hopeful lie, a plea to his ally not to panic, to send help. Because everyone in Ugarit who could see the horizon knew the truth. It wasn't 7 ships. It was a swarm, a plague of sails that blotted out the afternoon sun. A fleet so vast it looked as if the sea itself had grown teeth. The shouting outside grew louder, the sound of running feet on stone. A woman's scream, sharp and sudden, cut through the air. Urtanu looked down at the tablet. His hand was trembling. He had chronicled the life of a city, the reigns of kings, the births of princes. Now he was writing its eulogy. And as the first splintering crash of a battering ram echoed from the city gates, he would have known, with the cold certainty of a scholar facing the end of the world, that no one would be coming to help. The ships were gone, the army was gone, and soon the world he knew would be gone too. This isn't the story of one city's fall. It is the story of a world's end, a story of a thriving, globalized civilization that, in the space of a single lifetime, simply vanished. It's a mystery carved in scorched earth and sunken ships, whispered in the last panicked words on a clay tablet baked hard in the fire that consumed everything. This is the story of the Bronze Age collapse. To understand what was lost, you must first understand the world that was. Imagine, for a moment, it is the year 1250 BC. You are standing in the port of Ugarit on the coast of modern-day Syria. The air is a symphony of scents: Lebanese cedar, Egyptian incense, spices from the Far East, the sweat of men and animals, and over it all, the clean, sharp tang of the Mediterranean. This is not a primitive world. This is a world of empires, of magnificent palaces and intricate laws. It is the first great international age. A vast network of trade and diplomacy stretches from the misty shores of Greece to the sun-baked banks of the Nile, from the mountains of Anatolia to the fertile crescent of Mesopotamia. A letter written in Babylon could be read in Thebes. A king in Hattusa, the capital of the mighty Hittite Empire, calls the pharaoh of Egypt brother, and they seal their treaties not just with words, but with royal marriages. Tin from the distant mountains of Afghanistan travels thousands of miles to be alloyed with copper from Cyprus, creating the substance that defines the age: bronze. Stronger than copper, easier to cast than iron, it is the metal of kings, of armies, of gods. Chariots, the era's equivalent of battle tanks, are clad in it. The swords that guard the palaces are cast from it. The very statues of the gods gleam with its reddish gold light. This entire world runs on a delicate, complex system. A single merchant ship might carry a cargo that tells the story of this interconnectedness. On its deck, you would find Mycenaean pottery from Greece, intricate vases painted with octopuses and warriors, prized for their beauty. Beside them, great ingots of Cypriot copper, shaped like ox hides for easy carrying. Jars of olive oil and wine from the Aegean. Blue glass pendants crafted in Egypt, imitating precious lapis lazuli. Perhaps even a few ostrich eggs from Nubia, or elephant tusks from Syria, destined for the workshop of a palace artisan. This isn't barter. This is commerce, conducted through a shared script with standardized weights and measures. Scribes in a dozen languages manage vast inventories, record trade disputes, and draft international treaties with painstaking care. It is a world of order, a world of power. Look to the north, in the highlands of Anatolia, and you find the Hittites, a sober, pragmatic people, masters of bureaucracy and war. Their capital, Katusha, is a fortress city of immense stone walls and temples, from which they command a vast, multicultural empire. They were the first to master the secrets of iron, a metal they held as a state secret, more valuable than gold. Their kings are not just rulers, they are chief priests and supreme commanders, bound by treaties and a library of laws that would govern everything from land ownership to the price of a stolen goat. Look south, and you see the eternal kingdom, Egypt, the new kingdom, the Egypt of Rameses the Great. For centuries, it has been the superpower, a civilization so old it was ancient, even to the Hittites. Its power flows from the Nile, from its endless fields of grain. The pharaoh is a living god, his authority absolute. From his golden city of Pi-Rameses, he projects power into Canaan and Syria, demanding tribute, ensuring the flow of goods into his treasuries. The stability of the entire world seems to rest on the stability of the Egyptian throne. And to the west, across the sea, a different world, the Mycenaeans of Greece, the heroes of Homer's epics. These are not grand unified empires, but a collection of fortified palace kingdoms, Mycenae of the Lion Gate, Pylos, Tiryns. Their kings are warlords, obsessed with glory, honor, and plunder. Their homes are grim, cyclopean fortresses built for war. But from these strongholds, their ships dominate the Aegean, trading, raiding, establishing colonies. They are the newcomers, the aggressive, ambitious players on the world stage. For 300 years, this system held, this grand, intricate machine of palaces and ships, of scribes and kings, of bronze and gold. There were wars, yes. The Hittites and Egyptians fought a titanic battle at Kadesh, a clash of empires involving thousands of chariots. But even that war ended in the world's first known international peace treaty, a promise of eternal brotherhood carved on tablets of silver and clay. The system was strong enough to survive even the clash of superpowers. It seemed to the people who lived within it that it would last forever. They were wrong. The end did not begin with a bang. It began with a whisper, a change in the air. The first sign was the sky. The rains, which for generations had nourished the wheat fields of Anatolia and the olive groves of Greece, began to fail. We can read the story today, not in clay tablets, but in the silent testimony of nature, in the rings of ancient juniper trees, and in the layers of pollen buried in the sediment of dead lakes. Around 1200 BC, the data points to a sudden, severe, and prolonged period of drought. A climate event lasting for decades. At first, it was just a bad harvest, a nuisance. The palace granaries, vast storehouses designed for such an event, were opened. The great kings, in their correspondence, would have reassured one another. The gods were testing them perhaps, but the system would hold. Then one bad harvest was followed by another, and another. A letter found in the ruins of Ugarit, sent from the Hittite king to his vassal in the port city, is chilling in its polite desperation. It is not a request. It is a command. It is a matter of life and death, the great king writes, demanding an urgent shipment of 450 tons of grain. The heartland of the mighty Hittite empire, the breadbasket that fed its armies, was failing. Imagine being a farmer in a small village in central Anatolia. Each morning you look to the east, praying for clouds that never form. The sun is a merciless, brassy disk in a white sky. The river shrinks, cracking the earth at its banks. Your children's bellies are bloated, their eyes listless. The tax collector still comes, demanding the palace's share of a harvest that doesn't exist. You hear whispers of villages not far away where people have begun to eat their seed grain, a final, desperate act that seals the fate of the next year's harvest. The famine was a slow, creeping poison. It weakened the foundations of the world. Armies cannot march on empty stomachs. Craftsmen cannot work when they are starving. Social order begins to fray when a father cannot feed his family. The gods seem to have turned their faces away. Then, the earth itself began to shake. Across the eastern Mediterranean, a wave of earthquakes brought down the mighty walls of civilization. Archaeologists today can trace it, a destruction layer of rubble and fire that appears at city after city. In Greece, the great citadels of Mycenae and Tiryns show evidence of catastrophic seismic damage. Walls that were 10 meters thick, built by men who believed they were descended from gods, were thrown to the ground like children's toys. Palaces were shattered. Imagine the terror. You are a palace guard in Pylos, standing watch on the battlements. You have lived your entire life in the shadow of these immense stone walls, a symbol of permanence and power. And then, without warning, the world turns to liquid. The stone under your feet heaves and groans. You are thrown from your feet as the tower you stand on sways violently. You hear a sound like the world tearing in half, and you see the great walls of the citadel, the work of generations, collapsing into a mountain of dust and broken rock. In that moment, it would not feel like a natural disaster. It would feel like the end of the world, like the gods themselves had declared war on humanity. Famine weakened the people. Earthquakes shattered their walls. The system was groaning under the strain. Trade routes, the arteries of this world, became unreliable. The ships carrying grain were more vital than ever, but now they were sailing into a world filled with desperate people. And when people are desperate, they become dangerous. And that is when the whispers began. Whispers from the sea. They came from the west, from the collapsing Mycenaean world, or perhaps from Sicily or Sardinia. No one knew for sure. They were not a single people, not a unified kingdom. They were a loose confederation of the uprooted and the desperate. Farmers driven from their barren land. Warriors from fallen kingdoms with nothing left to lose. Entire communities, men, women, and children, packed into crude ships, fleeing a world that had failed them. They were a migration, a flood of hungry, violent humanity. The Egyptians, in their meticulous records, gave them names: the Peliset, the Cheka, the Shekelesh, the Denyen, the Weshesh. To history, they are known by the name the Egyptians gave the collective, the Sea Peoples. They didn't just raid, they annihilated. They were not trying to conquer territory and rule it. They were a firestorm, burning everything in their path, consuming what they needed and moving on. They arrived without warning, a fleet of ghosts on the horizon. They would land, sack a city, and melt back into the sea before any organized army could respond. One by one, the lights of the Bronze Age world began to go out. The great trade hub of Kition in Cyprus, a vital source of copper for the entire world, was burned to the ground. Then another city, then another. We can see it in the archaeological record, a layer of ash, and above it, crude foreign pottery. the calling card of the sea peoples. The Hittite Empire, already hollowed out by famine, was the first of the giants to fall, the frantic letters for grain stop. There is only silence. The capital city, Katusha, a metropolis that had stood for 500 years, was abandoned to the flames, its great libraries, its temples, its palaces, all torched. The empire that had challenged Egypt and dominated the Near East vanished from history so completely that for 3,000 years, scholars believed it was nothing more than a biblical myth. It was simply gone. Now imagine you are the king of Ugarit. The world you knew is collapsing around you. The Hittite Empire, your overlord and protector, is a smoking ruin. The trade routes that made your city rich are now highways for pirates and refugees. Every ship that arrives brings not wealth, but horrifying news. The city of Tarsus has fallen. Enkomi is in ashes. The world is shrinking. The darkness is closing in. You have sent your army and your fleet to help your Hittite allies, a decision that must now seem like a catastrophic mistake. You are left with a skeleton force to defend the richest prize on the coast. You are a lamb waiting for the slaughter. And you look out to the sea. You pray to Baal for a storm, for a miracle, but the sea is calm, and on the horizon you see them, not 7 ships, but a forest of masts. The system didn't just bend, it broke. This was the great, horrifying revelation of the late Bronze Age. It wasn't one disaster. It wasn't the famine or the earthquakes or the invaders alone. It was everything all at once, a cascading, systemic failure. Think of it like a body. The drought was a chronic illness, slowly sapping its strength. The earthquakes were sudden, traumatic injuries, breaking its bones. The sea peoples were a feverish infection, opportunistic and deadly, attacking the body when it was too weak to fight back. The complex, interconnected world they had built became their undoing. Its greatest strength was now its greatest vulnerability. Ugarit was rich because it was a hub for Hittite, Egyptian and Aegean trade. But when the Hittites collapsed, a third of that trade vanished overnight. When the Mycenaean palaces fell, their vibrant pottery and valuable exports stopped coming. The system was starved of the very goods and raw materials that gave it life. The bronze that defined the age became a symbol of this fragility. To make bronze, you need copper and tin. The copper came from Cyprus. The tin came from the far mountains of Afghanistan. The trade routes for both were now severed. Suddenly, the most critical military and agricultural material in the world became impossibly scarce. Scribes in Pylos catalogued every last scrap of bronze in the kingdom, recording it for emergency melting and reforging into weapons. It was a kingdom taking its own inventory on the edge of oblivion. The specialization that had created such wealth now created helplessness. The farmers were starving. The chariot makers had no wood. The bronze smiths had no tin. And the palace elites, who had managed this complex system for centuries, found they were powerless to stop its unraveling. Their intricate networks of diplomacy, their treaties of brotherhood written on clay, what good were they against a stateless, nameless enemy who had no capital to threaten, no king to negotiate with? How do you reason with a hurricane? This wasn't a war between nations. It was a war between order and chaos was winning. From the ashes of the Mycenaean palaces, refugees streamed eastward, joining the sea peoples, swelling their ranks. From the famine-racked Hittite heartland, entire populations moved south, searching for fertile land. The world was on the move, a great chaotic migration of the dispossessed. They washed up against the last bastion of stability, the final superpower still standing: Egypt. Pharaoh Ramesses III saw them coming. He was the last great warrior pharaoh of the new kingdom, and he understood the threat. This was not a territorial war. This was an existential one. On the walls of his mortuary temple at Medinet Habu, He carved a vast, stunning record of his desperate struggle. It is a chronicle of the end of the world. The foreign countries made a conspiracy in their islands, the hieroglyphs read. All at once the lands were removed and scattered in the fray. No land could stand before their arms. He lists the fallen: Kati, Kode, Karkamish, Arzawa, and Alashia. They were cut off at one time. This was not propaganda. This was a list of the dead, the entire Hittite sphere of influence. Gone. Rameses III knew they were coming for the Nile Delta, the fertile jewel of Egypt. He prepared his nation for total war. He conscripted every able-bodied man. He emptied the treasuries to equip his army and navy. His inscription is stark. I prepared my frontier, manned with warriors. I caused the river mouths to be prepared like a strong wall with warships, galleys and coasters, fully equipped, for they were manned completely from bow to stern with brave warriors with their weapons. The sea peoples came by land and by sea, a pincer movement designed to crush the last pillar of the Bronze Age world. Rameses III met their land army in southern Syria in a desperate, bloody battle. He defeated them. But the true test came at the mouth of the Nile. The Sea People's fleet sailed directly into the delta, a flotilla of raiders and migrating families. Rameses had set a brilliant trap. He let their ships enter the narrow channels of the river. Then his own navy, more maneuverable in the tight waterways, fell upon them from all sides. Archers lined the banks, raining death down upon the crowded enemy ships. Egyptian marines grappled the boats, boarding them in a frenzy of hand-to-hand combat. The carvings at Medinet Habu show the scene in brutal detail, a chaotic, churning melee of ships and men. The Sea People's distinctive feathered headdresses are everywhere. Their warriors fight fiercely, but they are trapped. Their ships capsize. They are dragged from the water and executed on the spot. The Nile runs red. Egypt had won. Rameses III had saved his kingdom. He had held back the tide. But the victory was a hollow one. The inscription, for all its bravado, ends on a somber note. Egypt was saved, but it was shattered. The treasury was empty. Its Asian territories were lost forever. The war had bled the kingdom dry. Rameses III himself would later be assassinated in a harem conspiracy, a sign of the instability that now plagued the throne. Egypt would survive, but its golden age was over. It retreated into itself, a shadow of its former glory, and the world it had once dominated was now a field of ruins. And what of Ugarit? Let us go back to that final hour, to the scribe Urtanu watching the enemy fleet fill his horizon. The chaos would have been absolute. The city's defences, undermanned, would have been breached quickly. The Sea Peoples poured through the gates. They were not an army with disciplined ranks and clear objectives. They were a mob, fueled by years of starvation and desperation. They would have swept through the merchants' quarters first, the richest part of the city. The sound of splintering doors, the screams of families dragged into the street. The workshops of the artisans, filled with ivory and gold, were ransacked. The great palaces, repositories of 1,000 years of wealth, were looted and set alight. Imagine Urtanu in the royal archive, the heart of the kingdom's knowledge. Around him are shelves stacked with thousands of clay tablets, diplomatic correspondence, legal codes, economic records, but also literature, the Epic of Keret, the tale of Akat, poems and myths that formed the very soul of his culture. He can hear the invaders in the palace now. The roar of the fire is getting closer. The heat is unbearable. He doesn't run. Where would he run to? The world outside is gone. Perhaps in that final moment, he takes one last look at the tablet he was writing, the desperate lying letter to a king who could not help him. He sees the black smoke pouring through the doorway. He smells the scent of his world burning. The fire that destroyed Ugarit also performed one last cruel miracle. As the cedar shelves of the archive burned and the mud brick roof collapsed, the intense heat baked the soft clay tablets, firing them like pottery. The last words of a dying world were turned to stone, preserved for archaeologists to find 3,000 years later. The library was incinerated, but its contents were saved by the very flames that consumed it. When the smoke cleared, Ugarit was gone. Its people were slaughtered, enslaved, or scattered to the winds. The great port city, the jewel of the Levant, was a smoking, silent ruin. And this same scene was repeated over and over across 1,000 miles of coastline. From Greece to Gaza, the great cities of the Bronze Age fell. Pylos, Hattusa, Troy, Megiddo. When the wave of destruction finally passed, the world that emerged was unrecognizable. The aftermath was not a new kingdom or a new empire. The aftermath was silence. A profound, deep darkness fell over the eastern Mediterranean. History calls it the Greek Dark Age, but it was a darkness that touched everywhere. The great complex systems of the Bronze Age were not replaced. They were simply gone. International trade ceased. The seas were no longer highways of commerce, but empty, dangerous wastes. The art of writing was lost in many regions. In Greece, the complex Linear B script used by the Mycenaean scribes vanished completely. For 400 years, no one in Greece would write a single word. An entire civilization became illiterate. History was replaced by myth, passed down orally through generations, becoming the distorted, heroic tales of the Trojan War that Homer would one day write down, a faint echo of a lost, grander age. The world became smaller, poorer, and more isolated. People abandoned the ruins of the great coastal cities and fled inland to small, impoverished, defensible villages in the hills. Populations plummeted. The grand palaces were left to crumble, their secrets buried under layers of earth. The knowledge of how to build with cut stone, how to create vibrant frescoes, how to cast life-sized bronze statues, all forgotten. It was a societal reset, a catastrophic loss of complexity. Life became brutal and short. The world of brothers and international treaties was replaced by the world of the local strongman, the petty chieftain ruling over a few dozen starving villagers. For centuries, this was the reality. A darker, simpler, more violent world. The Bronze Age did not just decline, it collapsed, utterly. And for millennia, the sheer scale of what was lost was forgotten, buried under the dust of ages, until the spades of archaeologists in the 19th and the 20th centuries began to uncover the cyclopean walls of Mycenae, the burned libraries of Ugarit, and the lost capital of the Hittites. Only then did we begin to understand the ghost of this brilliant, vanished world. The story of the Bronze Age collapse is more than just a history lesson. It is a cautionary tale, an echo across 3,000 years. It speaks to the fragility of even the most sophisticated and powerful civilizations. They had their own version of globalization, a complex web of interdependencies that brought them immense prosperity, but also made them catastrophically vulnerable to systemic shock. Their world was built on a stable climate, and when that climate changed, the foundations of their food supply crumbled. They faced mass migrations of displaced people, a crisis that no wall or army could truly contain. Their intricate political and economic systems, once thought to be eternal, proved brittle in the face of a perfect storm of converging crises. We look back from our own interconnected world, a world of global supply chains, of just-in-time delivery, of a delicate digital and economic ecosystem that spans the planet. A world that also faces unprecedented climate change, resource scarcity, and the unpredictable movement of desperate populations. We tell ourselves that we are different, that our technology, our knowledge, our institutions make us more resilient. And perhaps they do. But the silence that fell over the world in 1200 BC leaves us with a haunting question. The people of Ugarit, of Mycenae, of Hattusa, they also believed their world was permanent. They believed the ships would always arrive, laden with copper and grain. They believed their kings were invincible and their gods were on their side. They believed their way of life was the pinnacle of human achievement, right up until the day it wasn't. What happens to a world, our world, when the ships stop coming? If the echoes of forgotten worlds call to you, subscribe for more stories lost to time. We unearth the mysteries that lie buried, waiting to be told.